In one of my last videos, I did an unboxing and a technical breakdown of the Annex coilovers I got for Project Cream Puff. In this video, I'm gonna go ahead and toss those on. I'm really excited about this. These are such great coilovers. It's something I've been looking forward to for a long time, is being able to put Annex coilovers on one of my vehicles. And now I have the opportunity to do that. So let's go ahead and start working on the car. Now, if you look closely, this spring has fallen off of the shock, and that mount is pretty bent up. So I guess it's time to just go ahead and yank this guy off. Down on the bottom of the knuckle here where it bolts the shock, we've just got 2 bolts. There's one here and one on the other side. We're gonna undo those. We're also gonna unbolt the brake caliper off, and then we're also gonna yank the hub and rotor assembly, because that's gonna go to the new coilover. You're also going to need the brake backing plate here, so we're going to take that off. All right, now we're going to undo the top. Here's a little side-by-side comparison. Stock blown suspension with bent spring perches and all that stuff, and Annex with swift springs and all that good stuff. These just look so dang good. These coilovers are directional to some extent, so make sure you put the right side on the right side of the vehicle. What I'm doing now is I'm adjusting the ride height a bit, because they were shortened to fit in the box, and this is way too short, I think, for the car. So we're gonna bring it down quite a bit. Now we'll just go ahead and grab some grease and we'll toss the brakes and stuff back on. Now, I already set ride height, but I'm going to show you what I did. Is I went all up to the top here, to the bottom of the top hat, way up in there, and then I went over like this and measured where the coilover was at, and then tightened it down. Guess let's toss the wheel on and see where it all sits at. This might be too low, I'm not really sure. Okay. Not bad. Honestly, I think that's about perfect for now. Looks like I need to add a little bit of caster in the center of the wheel, but yeah, it's a pretty good ride height. Now let's see if we can mimic that with the other side. The process is literally the exact same for the other side, so I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go get the left side on and then set the front end on the ground. Now that I've got the front suspension on, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the rears. So before I even get the car in the air, I'm gonna do a couple things for the rear coilovers, get them set up, ready to go on. I'm running the divorce setup instead of true rear coilovers. And what I do before I even get started putting it on the car is right in here, we got a hole right here, and then what I do is I thread the shock body down into the mount until you can see the silver of the coilover just barely inside of it. So about halfway through the hole, that's about where I look to have it. And then what you're also going to do is you're going to measure the overall spring height. And the reason for that is because you do want to add about 5 to 6 millimeters of spring preload, just enough to compress the springs a little bit. So that's what we're going to do after we get the shocks on the car. You're going to measure the height of the spring so that once you start to compress it a little bit in the mount, you can remeasure it and make sure that compared to full height unloaded, you're measuring it just about 5 to 6 millimeters compressed. Once you get in here, you're going to remove the spring, the bump stop, and the shock. Now the shock right now is holding up the axle. It's best to do the shocks one side at a time because the shocks are actually what support or hold up the axle right now. I've got the axle supported by the jack for right now. Now we're going to go ahead and install this bushing. To do that, we've got to remove the Annex adjuster knob using two 2mm set screws. We'll pull the knob off, pull the nut off, and then we're going to install the bushing into the car.
Right, going back together with the left side, I did things in the wrong order and made things a ton more difficult for myself. Like the Annex shock should not go on before the Swiss spring and Annex spring perch. So, going over to the right side, after you remove the stock shock, stock spring, and the bump stop, you'll also set your Annex shock to the middle of the adjustment like I showed previously. You'll then measure the spring height. Here's what I was talking about, measuring the spring from the bottom to the very tippy top. Just make sure to be as accurate as possible. Install the rear spring and Annex adjustable perch. Then install the rear shock upper sleeve mount. Install the rear shock. Check spring droop and adjust as desired. I nailed it, so I didn't have to adjust any of that, fortunately.
Back in the garage, the car is sitting on all four corners. It's looking really good. I'm super excited about it. I feel like I really nailed the ride height just out of the box. And with just guesstimates, I'm really happy with it. Once I get on the road, you might adjust it a little bit. In my other video about the Annex coilovers, there were some really good comments that spurred some really awesome discussion. I wanted to cover a couple of points from that and bring it up because they were really good. Those are the 2 points of spindles and internals of the Annex coilovers. It's no secret that Annex uses a spindle that's sourced from overseas, from Asia. The discussion has been about OEM versus aftermarket spindles. There's an individual whose business sources and sells suspension that uses the OEM spindles, and his mindset is that the OEM spindles are better and shares a couple of anecdotal stories. I don't know what's better, OEM or aftermarket, but what I can say is that the aftermarket spindles that Annex uses are used by Annex, obviously, BC Racing, Megan Racing, I'm pretty sure Feel uses them now, Greddy definitely uses them, Fortune Auto, and more. So the point I'm getting at is these spindles have been used by tons and tons of different companies, and they've been used for probably a decade or so, if not longer now. And if there were truly an issue with these spindles, I think that it would be common knowledge that you shouldn't buy coilovers that come with these aftermarket spindles. But that's just not the case. It was a really cool discussion though, because other things got brought up, like the design of the spindles. For example, these spindles were designed with steering suspension technology and tire technology from 35, 40 years ago. We're talking like 1970s, 1980 technology. These cars came with like 185, 65, 14-inch tires and a pretty high tread wear rating. And when you compare that to like 86s that are used on track now with like, R compound 245, 40, 15-inch tires, that is a huge difference in the amount of forces put on them. So when you add that, the additional G-forces, and then you get into an accident on track, that has the potential to damage not only the spindle that was designed, for 35-year-old technology, but also has the potential to damage your control arm and your tie rod end and the actual strut. You might bend your strut housing.
And I think a lot of people overlook the potential for bending your spindle. At that point, it doesn't matter if it's OEM or aftermarket. That spindle could get damaged. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I think at that point, that's something like that happens, the spindle is definitely a point to inspect. Just add it to your checklist. Now, could the spindle design be better? I don't know. Maybe. Guess we'll see what the future holds. The other point that got brought up was talking about the internals of the shocks. So somebody mentioned, like, well, why don't you have a reputable brand like Penske or Öhlins or, I don't know, you named like 4 or 5 different shock companies. Why don't you have them build the shocks, since they obviously know what they're doing? They've been around for a long time. They've been in the racing industry for a long time. They obviously know what they're doing. Why would you start a new company to try and reinvent the wheel a little bit? I think there's something to that mindset. But one of the things that this person may not have realized is that a lot of these companies, these major companies like Penske and Öhlins and all these guys, the couple that he mentioned, they oftentimes will sublet their work out to shops that are certified to do it, right? And Annex is awesome because they are factory trained for some of these high quality companies, meaning that they are perfectly capable of designing and building shocks to that level. Annex was not able to confirm which company it was because there's an NDA in place, but they did confirm that one of these shock companies this guy mentioned, as holding as top tier in his book, Annex builds shocks for them, which is cool because like the Annex shocks, yeah, there's some external bits that are sourced from Asia, but one of the main focuses for their shocks was building it catered to the AE86, which really hasn't been done for a very long time. But they also have their own Annex proprietary design stuff in the shocks. So they're all hand assembled in California. They're not manufactured overseas. Yeah, they may use some stuff that's off the shelf, but that doesn't mean that they're just the generic stuff that you can get from overseas. So it's pretty cool. I'm like super stoked on this. Like the fact that Annex is pretty open about all this is pretty neat. It's not often that you get like this kind of insight into a suspension company. All right, that's all I've got for now. I'm really excited that Project Cream Puff is moving right along. I've got some big updates. Some other videos are coming out, so make sure you keep an eye on my channel. Check it out. And hopefully soon this thing will be running and driving. Because, man, this just looks so dang good. It's coming together. Yeah!